Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us here. The topic we wanted to present to you today is a bit of a special one, as it said, nuclear renaissance. The reason we chose this topic is because we have seen a strong increase in interest from both private investors and professional investors across Europe in the last 2 years in this particular topic. It was maybe the best performing topic in the thematic equity space last year. So I just want to give a bit of insights why that is, why this has been such an interesting trend for investors, and why we believe it might continue. And I'll give you a bit of background beyond just nuclear, why the commodity space, and particularly the metal space, the transition material space, as we call it, is of interest for investors these days and what the drivers are behind it. And to explain a little bit who we are, because probably many of you will not know us, it's the first time that we participate in this conference here. So our name is HANetf. As the name says, we are an ETF provider. That's why we are at the passive conference here. We had the pleasure of listing our first product last year on the Warsaw Stock Exchange. I think someone mentioned it already earlier in another presentation. In this kind of wheel of commodities, and we named it the commodity super cycle. Is the next commodity super cycle coming? And these are a couple of exposures that our company is involved in, where we have strategies which we discuss with investors, and where we see that interest is really coming back. Gold is, as I said, was the one product we brought to market last year to Poland, because we realized that Polish investors have a high aptitude for gold. They like gold as an investment. We've seen very encouraging trading numbers on the exchange since then, so it's been really a great success, and we're very grateful to Warsaw Stock Exchange for the support since then. And I think we will probably expand our footprint here in Poland, and maybe with some of these topics. And the reason why we see so much interest in these themes is because the energy transition, which we've all read about and know about, has really started to accelerate in the last 3, 4, 5 years. So energy transition means investment and demand in things like electric cars, in the electricity grid, so the transmission of energy, in wind turbines, in solar panels, and things like that. Now, all these things, what they have in common is that if you have to renew your energy transition, your energy grid, if you have to build new solar installations or new wind turbines, you need a lot of copper, you need a lot of nickel, manganese. The battery technologies need a kind of rare earths for the engines that basically drive the motor behind the turbines. Wind turbines, for example.
Turbin wiatrowych na przykład. Wzięliśmy chyba potrojenie mniej więcej inwestycji w tym obszarze przez ostatnie 3, 4, 5 lat. To wpłynęło na wydobywców miedzi, złota, również tam jest pewne przebudzenie. Odrębnie troszeczkę od transformacji energetycznej, raczej chodzi o cykl ekonomiczny, ale również wydobycie uranu zaczęło wzrastać rok, 2 wcześniej przed pozostałymi tematami. Następnie te
You can see here, just to give you, before I go into uranium itself, a bit of background on what happens in other metals and other kind of mining sectors, and why investors are actually interested. So here's an interesting chart with the gold mining sector compared to S&P. Now, as we all know, S&P and general equities have done very well in the last 10 years plus, and accordingly, the interest since the last crash in 2008, the big financial crisis, has really come down for gold miners. And if you believe that these trends that we see over many, over decades actually, on average come back to the mean at some point, we have been below the mean here, this trend, for a long time now, for 15 years. You can be skeptical and say maybe it's justified, but there are more and more voices who say maybe this trend has to come back. It has to go the other way again. So we've seen interest in gold mining from a range of professional investors. Here's the same chart, actually gold miners versus gold. We see a similar trend. Gold has actually done very well recently. It's hit new all-time highs, but the miners have not yet capitalized on that trend. And we believe this will be one part of the wider mining sector where also uranium miners belong to, which will potentially have an interesting future, and which it might pay to look at it more closely. Here's a chart from the copper mining space. Recently, what you see here is the so-called treatment and refining charges. These are charges that the smelters, the guys who take the raw copper and use it to produce usable copper, that's what they charge to make a margin, basically. They say, okay, I'm buying the raw copper, and you have to pay me a premium so I can produce other copper products afterwards. And this premium has collapsed recently. That's measured in China particularly, because China is one of the biggest buyers of this raw copper. And this is normally indicative of too little supply in the spot market. So it's normally a sign that the spot market is undersupplied, there's more demand from these smelters to produce end goods in copper, which means there should be, it probably needs to incentivize a higher price in the spot market, rising copper prices, to then in the mid to long run incentivize higher production of raw copper. So that's another example of the mining sector in general, and this commodity sector for metals, that it is going into a new interesting phase and potentially a rising bull market phase. And moving on now to basically the main topic, what you see here is the development of the uranium price over the last 20 plus years. And to give you a bit of background, so the last big spike we saw was in 2006, and sorry, my little pointer's not very good. You probably don't see it anyway, so let's leave it aside. That big spike was the last commodity super cycle in 2006, and uranium really went up with all other commodities. There was not a particularly strong reason why exactly at that time uranium and nuclear energy was so high in demand. But what happened afterwards was then this cycle came to an end. You had the financial crisis. The interest for commodities was not that high anymore. And then you had here in 2011 is when Fukushima happened. And Fukushima was really obviously a very bad thing that happened in Japan. And it was a signal for the wider industry worldwide that maybe the age of nuclear energy is coming to a slow end. Germany decided to go out of nuclear energy. And many other countries were also thinking, let's stop it. Japan had 30% of their, or around 30% of their energy coming from nuclear, and then the government said, we go out of nuclear. So they stopped all the reactors. So the consequence of this was that the price of uranium came down, 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 and then reached a low around that point here of $20 per pound of uranium, of uranium ore. Now, that had an effect on the primary production, which comes from the mines. Because if you're a mine, as every business, you're selling your product, your raw uranium, to somebody to then refine it and then to sell it to the users of uranium, who are the power plants and the utilities. But at $20 per pound, you don't run a profitable business. You're most likely unprofitable, except for the really low-cost producers or the government, state-owned producers who are, guaranteeing a certain quota to produce. So then mines stopped producing, and then exactly at that time, kind of a couple of years later, then you had the COVID crunch. During COVID, there were supply disruptions again in the mining sector. And around that time also, 2018, 19, 20, the world said more and more, okay, you know what, we need, for the energy transition to happen successfully, we actually need nuclear energy as a building block in our overall power system. And now, especially in the last 2-3 years, we've seen, if I jump to this one, we've seen, and you don't have to read each point, but the important thing is, we have seen support for nuclear energy from around the world. So China is and will be the biggest producer of new power plants. They have a very long-term plan to build, I said, like 400 gigawatts of production. That's more than the whole world produces at the moment. The capacity worldwide is 370 gigawatts of energy from nuclear plants. China wants to be bigger than the whole world by 2060. So they have not just plants under production, but they also have a plan of 150 new plants. So if you go back here to see the scale of China, so you have 430-ish power plants operational today. China has, I think, 20-30 under production, another 50 planned, and then another 150 suggested for evaluation whether they're feasible. So it's huge numbers that they are building, but it's not China again. As I said, it's the whole world who's really kind of coming back into who's accepting the idea that nuclear is probably needed for the energy transition. Asia, as I said, Japan is powering up all its nuclear plants that they stopped. Around half of them are already operational again. The other half is being put back in operation now. Korea, they have roughly a third of the energy coming from nuclear. They're very big, one of the, I think, top 5 or 6 countries in the world with nuclear plants. The president in 2017 said, stop, we decommission all our power plants. I think 4 years later, the next president said, reversal, we go back. All the power plants come back in action. So this, the fact that the whole world, even the EU, even EU said, okay, you know what, we accept it, we need it. France is the biggest country in Europe in terms of power, nuclear power. They committed 50 billion for new reactors over the coming years and decades. Poland approved its first nuclear reactor in, I think it was end of 2022. A very big one, actually, with almost 4 gigawatt capacity, 3.5, I think. That's very big. A standard nuclear plant has about 1 gigawatt of capacity. So Poland is coming into the market for the first time. Japan, I've covered US. Biden is a big proponent. Just now in March, the House of Representatives has passed a kind of a law, a bipartisan law to improve the efficiency of how fast a nuclear plant is approved in the US. So to make that process more streamlined and faster so they can build new technology plants for the future. So the whole world is looking at it, and the reaction that came from that was that around this time here, the world says we need nuclear energy again. And exactly at that time, the mines stopped producing here. So you have a lack of production coming here and suddenly an increase in demand. And this is what led to this sudden spike. Prices went up from $30 to now over $100 last year. They came a bit down now to $90. But it's still like, it was a tripling basically in a few years. And it was really this sudden demand that everyone says we will need more fuel for our power plants. And the mines, once you shut the mine down and you put it idle, you need like 4 or 5 years to go from doing nothing to producing. So not building a new one, just going from, I have a mine, but I need to restart it. To build a new mine, you need somewhere from 10 to 15 years. So you need very long cycles to make decisions on the mining sector and to start production in the primary market. So that's what then drove the price up, because many traders and users said, like, okay, we will have a problem probably in the coming few years, because many of these utilities and other people, they will think long term. They will say, okay, I have plans for so and so many reactors, so I need to secure my fuel for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And then if you have to secure that, well, you have to enter into contracts with people who sell you the stuff. And then suddenly the price goes up because your demand starts going up and you know you will have a supply problem. So this gap is being filled at the moment with existing inventories. There are stockpiles of existing uranium. In the past, people used to use old nuclear warheads to actually decommission them and reuse the fuel. But all these secondary supply sources have a certain limit. So it remains an open question how quick the mine production can be scaled back up and how quick we can get new mines producing. The expectations at the moment are that we will have a supply deficit probably for the next 3, 4, 5 years until end of this decade. So that's one of the main reasons why this cycle has been so interesting in the last year, and why also the uranium miners have seen an increase of close to 80–90% last year. It has come down a bit now. We've taken a little pause in the bull market, which is probably healthy. But we believe that this trend, this overall theme that I just showed, will continue for the next coming years. And just to briefly highlight again, why do people actually care about, just to give you these 2 statistics about the nuclear plants? Well, one reason is because they have such a stable base load, which means that once they're operational, they normally operate somewhere near close to capacity. Meaning that you don't compare to wind turbine. If the wind doesn't blow, there's no energy. When the wind blows strongly, there's great energy. But if you're unlucky, maybe the wind blows at night, and you actually don't need a lot of energy at night. We know there are cycles in energy use. When people come home in the evening, there's a lot of energy use. It gets dark in the morning when you wake up, but during the day there's light. You don't need so much energy. So these cycles, and accordingly, you need the energy. And then, well, if we all switch to clean energy and one day there's no sunshine and there's no wind, but you need a lot of energy, what do you do then? There's normally two options. You can store energy. You can create battery storage and energy storage to keep the energy during good times and give it in bad times. But the other important one is to have a baseload energy, which is nuclear is one of the highest baseload energy systems you can have to guarantee the stable energy supply at all times. And the second one was that nuclear has actually the lowest CO2 footprint amongst all energy sources, because the only time when you really create CO2 is during the building process, when the trucks come and you build the plant and you do everything. But once you have it running, there's no CO2 emission or anything. So it's a very, very green source of energy. Of course, we have to be open about it. Not everyone feels comfortable with the idea of a nuclear plant. There have been accidents like Fukushima, Chernobyl, and other places. So I think the one counter-argument there is that we do have very good and new technology actually in that space. There are very modern modular reactors with very, I would say, it's not fail-safe always, but it's a safer technology than we had in the past. And we believe if you make use of that, you can credibly minimize the risk of these kind of incidents happening. So these are the two main arguments why people are in favor of the nuclear power plants. That is just what I said before. I'm not going to dwell too long on it, but this is the long-term, in green and blue, the long-term expected demand for nuclear, for uranium, based on the increasing demand from power plants. And that's mostly the primary mine supply, which in the long run is going down. Now, this will probably change if prices stay very high for long term. Of course, you will go and find new sources to mine the material. And at the moment, Kazakhstan is the big, the elephant in the room. They're the biggest producers. Almost half of the world's uranium comes from them. Interestingly, though, Australia, who's just number 4 in terms of production, they actually have the biggest reserves in the world, which we know of at the moment, which are economically viable. Roughly, I think, a third of the uranium supply worldwide, reserves worldwide come from Australia, but it just hasn't been developed yet. So we could see a switch in the future more towards countries like Australia. Canada is already a fairly big producer, and they're also roughly equivalent in terms of reserves. Kazakhstan, at the moment, this can also cause a bit of an issue sometimes. Kazatomprom, the biggest producer in the country of uranium, in Q1, in January this year, they said in the I think it was the press conference for the end of year financial statement, they said, sorry, we can actually only produce 20% less uranium than we promised for this year. What happened? Well, 20% less uranium production from them than expected, multiplied by 0.4, means roughly 8% of world production was suddenly down. What happened? The price of uranium went up 10% roughly on that day, because everyone said, like, okay, where do we get our uranium from? And they said, nobody really knows why that is. There's different sources now claiming different things. Back then they said, well, we don't have sulfuric acid. It's like just a chemical. They don't have the chemical to get the uranium out of the ground. Now there's rumors that they just didn't want to sell, actually, because they're waiting for higher prices, or nobody's quite sure what the exact reason is, but it's a bit of a risk. And this risk, again, can sometimes, as bad as it sounds, it can be good for some stock prices or investors, because these geopolitical risks, they work sometimes in your favor when it can bring prices further up. So that's it, about the outlook for the uranium. I'll just very briefly leave you with how can you invest if you wanted to invest. We ourselves, follow two strategies. We give investors the possibility to simply get broad exposure to the whole industry, to the uranium mining industry. If you follow that approach, Kazatomprom and Cameco is from Canada, the biggest producer there, and Kazatomprom, they are the big guys in your universe, so you invest heavily, probably 30% of your portfolio in these two big companies, and then a bunch of other smaller companies. A lot of Canadian exposure is at Kazakhstan with that one big company, and you can also mix some physical uranium into it. So we did a mixed strategy where we use roughly 80% equities, so mining companies, and the other 20% in physical uranium. That's one way to do it. If you want to do it a little bit more kind of long-term oriented, if you have a more bullish case and you're really kind of positive on the industry, you can play it in a way that you exclude these two big guys. You take out Kazatomprom, you take out Cameco, you don't invest in physical uranium directly, but you only use the smaller companies, which are called junior miners. The benefit of these guys is that they are young. They have not yet started production often, so they have mines and areas where which are under exploration and under development. And the way they normally sell the uranium is with long-term contracts to the future. So they say, okay, you want to buy from me a uranium for the next 10 years, starting from year 2027 until 2036 or whatever. Which means they can benefit from the higher prices which we have today, because they will start to sell future production at already high prices. Cameco and Kazatomprom, they are bigger, more stable companies, but of course they have a lot of old contracts from the past because they have a big pipeline of existing business. That business was contracted in the past when the prices were a bit lower at 30, 40, 50, 60 dollar per uranium. So with these young companies, with the juniors, you will normally get a bit of a higher beta to the market if the uranium price goes up, because they can benefit from it more. With the large guys, you get a slightly lower beta normally, but you get a bit more stability. So it really depends on your risk appetite and what you know, how you want to play it. So that was the overview. Thank you very much for your time and interest. I hope you know, I could tell you something new. Have a look at our webpage if you want to learn more. We have a couple more resources there. Thank you very much.